One of the darkest times in American history is something that many people do not talk about.
The Japanese internment camps in the 1900s were overlooked and forgotten.
This inhumane decision by the American government was meant to single out one human race and caused by mass hysteria. Before talking about the Japanese internment camps, it is important to understand how and why they came about in the first place. The relocation of Japanese Americans was an immediate result of the bombing of Pearl Harbor that took place on December 7, 1941. This incident immediately sent the American government and its citizens into a panic. This led President Franklin D. Roosevelt to order that all Americans of Japanese descent be forced into internment camps. He did this by signing an executive order on February 19, 1942.
The Executive Order of 9066 was passed through Congress and immediately ordered the relocation of all Americans of Japanese ancestry. Any American who was at least 1/16 Japanese was forced to leave their homes and head to relocation centers. One crazy statistic is that 66% of these Japanese Americans that were being relocated had never even visited Japan. Another crazy fact is that even Japanese American war veterans were sent to these camps. They became a scapegoat and an easy target for the American government to turn to.
Only a few days' notice was given to the Japanese Americans, so they had to hurry up and sell all of their belongings. Many who owned businesses had to sell them for way less than their worth.
There was a total of 10 internment camps across the country. They were located in California, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. Their specific names are Topaz Camp in central Utah, Colorado River Camp in Arizona, Gila River Camp in Phoenix, Arizona, Granada Camp in Colorado, Heart Mountain Camp in Wyoming, Jerome Camp in Arkansas, Manzanar Camp in California, Minidoka Camp in Idaho, Roher Camp in Arkansas, and Tule Lake Camp in California. The first camp officially opened in Manzanar, California on March 21, 1942. Across all of these internment camps, there were approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans living in these sites.
Life in the internment camps were not easy and pretty. They were typically described as small towns. In fact, the conditions were very harsh and violent. Individuals were enclosed behind a barbed wire fence and felt more like animals in cages rather than humans. Everyone in the camp was always waiting in line. The cost to feed each person in the camp cost about 45 cents per day. Because this was so expensive, many of the residents in the camps were not given a lot or enough food. Later on, Japanese Americans tried to start growing their own food in order to get enough nutrients. Whether it was for the doctors, bathroom, or food, the overcrowded camp was not able to efficiently accommodate all of its residents. There was a lot of violence in the camps every single day. Some were fights between each other, and others were fights between the residents and the officers. Many people that tried to escape would be shot and most likely killed. Nothing was tolerated in the camps, and officials were ruthless. Guards would use harsh methods like tear gas, guns, and detainment to stop people from rioting. The Japanese Americans no longer had any freedom.
The living conditions in these camps were very harsh. The toilet facilities were very poor, and the smell was horrendous every time someone from the camp would use the restroom. 25 people were assigned to live in a room that was only designed for 4 people. This caused for diseases to be spread around very quickly and for many people to face serious medical conditions. Many of the camp survivors have commented on what life was like during this time. Henry Sugimoto said, "Sometime the train stopped, 15 to 20 minutes to take fresh air. Supper time and in the desert, in the middle of a state. Already before we got out of the train, Army machine guns lined up towards us. Not towards the other side to protect us, but like the enemy, pointed machine guns towards us."
There were 2 triumphs that came out of this tragedy. The first one was between Korematsu versus the United States, and the second one happened when the president signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988.
In 1944, there was a case between Korematsu and the United States. Fred Korematsu was born an American but had Japanese descent. At age 23 in May of 1942, he was arrested for not going to the camps, although it was an order. Stated that he should, as an American citizen, be allowed to live where he likes and should not have to report to the camps. It ended up being a 6-3 decision with the Supreme Court, and they stated that interning Japanese Americans during the war for military purposes was constitutional. In 1984, federal court voided Fred's conviction. Later, in 1988, Bill Clinton presented Fred with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor.
Triumph rose from the dark times once the Japanese-American Redress Bill passed through Congress and was signed by President Ronald Reagan. This was a political achievement that went against all odds. The bill is called the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. It ordered an apology and monetary compensation from the government for all victims. Each victim of the tragedy would receive $20,000 from the government and a sincere acknowledgement of the hardship they endured. However, once this bill passed, there was an estimated of only 60,000 of the 120,000 Japanese Americans interned that were still alive.
The following is a video of President Ronald Reagan's speech when he signed the act.
Fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival, and it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. For throughout the war, Japanese Americans in the tens of thousands remained utterly loyal to the United States. Indeed, scores of Japanese Americans volunteered for our armed forces, many stepping forward in the internment camps themselves. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up entirely of Japanese Americans, served with immense distinction to defend this nation, their nation. Yet back at home, the soldiers' families were being denied the very freedom for which so many of the soldiers themselves were laying down their lives. Congressman Norman Mineta, with us today, was 10 years old when his family was interned. In the congressman's words, "My own family was sent first to Santa Anita Racetrack. We showered in the horse paddocks. Some families lived in converted stables, others in hastily thrown together barracks. We were then moved to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, where our entire family lived in one small room of a rude tar paper barrack. Like so many tens of thousands of others, the members of the Mineta family lived in those conditions not for a matter of weeks or months, but for 3 long years. The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
On August 10, 2018, it was the 25th anniversary of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. This was celebrated and commemorated by the American government. Many senators and representatives spoke on this day regarding the act. Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii commented on the incident in a reverent way, quoting, "25 years ago, the United States took steps to right a terrible wrong, while the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which granted reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, could not possibly undo the injustices done to these men, women, and families. It did send a message. We must never allow something like that to happen in this country ever again." Although no measures can ever be granted to completely compensate the tragedy victims of this event endured, the United States government was attempting to fix it in the best way possible.